Уважаемые дамы и господа, сессия 8 «Подъем глобального юга» начнется через 2 минуты. Dear ladies and gentlemen, session 8, Rise of the Global South, will begin in 2 minutes. Уважаемые дамы и господа, мы начинаем сессию 8. Пожалуйста, занимайте ваши места в зале. Dear ladies and gentlemen, we are start the session 8. Please proceed your seats. Уважаемые дамы и господа, мы начинаем сессию 8. Пожалуйста, занимайте ваши места в зале. Dear ladies and gentlemen, please proceed your seats. We are start session 8. На сцену приглашаются модератор Анатолий Torkunov, ректор МГИМО МИД России, академик РАН. Панкадж Саран, глава группы советников Совета национальной безопасности Индии, директор аналитического центра НАТСТРАТ Индия. Хосе Рамон Кабаньяс, директор Центра исследований международной политики Республика Куба. Венкатеш Варма, бывший посол Индии в Российской Федерации с 2018 по 2021 годы. Сайфул Хок, бывший посол Народной Республики Бангладеш в Российской Федерации. Федор Войтоловский, директор МГИМО РАН. Please welcome to the stage Moderator Anatoly Torkunov, Rector of MGIMO University, full member of the Russian Academy of Sciences. Pankaj Saran, convener of NATSTRAT, member of the National Security Advisory Board, India. José Ramón Cabañas, director of the Center for International Policy Studies, Republic of Cuba. Venkatesh Varma, former ambassador of India to the Russian Federation. Saiful Haq, former ambassador of the People's Republic of Bangladesh to the Russian Federation. Fyodor Voitolovsky, director of Primakov Institute of World Economy and International Relations.
Спасибо за представление. Хотел бы сказать, что у нас...
Thank you for introduction. We have a unique panel. It's unique because it's the last at our Primakov readings, and it is unique because we have 4 foreign guests here, and all of them are ambassadors, and 3 of them used to be ambassadors in Russia, served in Russia. And I don't remember such a similar panel ever arranged. So I, from the bottom of my heart, I welcome you and thank for the effort to come here to this Primakov reading that have special significance, as you might have understood, for the scholars and politicians and diplomats, because many diplomats, including the foreign minister, took part in our readings. We have an interesting topic, and probably it is good that our panel is the last in among the previous panels. If we look at the agenda, the program of the forum, the problem of the global south was mentioned at almost all the panels. And when we all understand that the problem of the global south is a mega trend in international relations, and recently the conversations about it seemed like an intellectual exercise, but over the last few years, we observed global changes so radical that the global south sounds at many international forums, and it is not just a theory but a factor of international policy. And the more countries of the global south try to strengthen their sovereignty, they demonstrate their political ambitions, and they don't just strive for survival, but participation in the world order.
And in the world where the specific weight of the West, of the global South is rising, so then there is intersection of the zone of interest of conventional great powers, each of which hopes for its loyalty. And this is quite logical. So remembering that the positions of the third parties, and of the third countries, the position of the third countries, their importance, their weight increases, and certainly this global security, global balance of power, and certainly global energy market, etc. All this, so the importance of the global south is exponentially rising. And so they're turning to the east and more closer contacts with the global south. It's not a replacement our connections with the West, but the movement east is an attempt to centralize, to better balance Russia's politics. And that's exactly what Mr. Primakov was after. That's what he was expounding. So, and I'd like just to ask several questions. So then turning to Mr. Pankaj Sharan. So what could be your take? To what extent the global south could act in a consolidated measure, just act together in a consolidated, harmonized manner? And can we work on the assumption that this kind of consolidation would only get stronger in future? Or when we talk about the global south, it's to a great extent this kind of abstract idealistic notion, or it's something more than that?
Well, firstly, let me thank you, Mr. Torkunov, and I want to also thank Primakov Readings for inviting me. And this is, in fact, a very fitting opportunity to talk about Mr. Yevgeny Primakov, because he foresaw a lot of the current state of the world in terms of, I would say, a non-unipolar world. And his idea about Russia, India, and China working together was, in fact, in many ways quite seminal. To answer your question, I would like to begin by saying, and I agree with you, that the global south is not amenable to any definition or a listing of countries, much less who are its leaders. It can be said to have previous incarnations, such as the non-aligned movement, or the third world, or the developing world, or even the G77. We've also seen usage of the phrase emerging markets or emerging economies to describe, I would say, a certain category of countries. Such lexicon originated either in the context of the Cold War or, in fact, in multilateral development banks and Western investment agencies. Therefore, trying to find a definition for what is neither possible nor productive is really not warranted. The global south is more of a conceptual idea that represents a viewpoint, a perspective, and to an extent, an economic and political reality of the world. The concept derives from the different divisions that characterize the development decades of the 1970s and 80s between the rich north and the poor south. Today, The Global South is symbolic of a political and economic perspective of a large number of countries across continents that is at variance with the established global order dominated by the major powers, which I would include as the G7, Russia, and China. Is the Global South a momentary and passing phenomenon that emerged as a reaction to some developments? And will it dissolve once the causative factors no longer exist? Or is it likely to be an enduring factor of the global landscape that stands on its own merits? I think this is a question that we need to ask ourselves. The Global South emerged in a much sharper manner following the Ukraine conflict. The Global South spoke up and expressed itself. India was one of the first and perhaps the most effective vehicles that gave expression to the views of a large number of countries of all shades and all stages of economic development, and the voice of the Global South found ready resonance. Let me put it like this, that the rise of the Global South is effectively a verdict on the unsatisfactory state of world affairs and the existing international system. This is a combination of feelings. There is a combination of feelings that define the sentiment in the Global South. And I would list three basic broad sentiments. The first is resentment. Resentment because while the Global South has historically and was not historically responsible for successive global crises, and I would refer here to the Western financial crisis of 2008, the decade of the US invasions in West Asia, the global pandemic of 2020, and the Russian special military operation in Ukraine of 2022, the Global South in all of these has been a victim of their consequences. To this, I would add the overhang of the global strategic competition that is being played out rather unabashedly between the major powers, the US-led West, Russia, and China. In all of this, the Global South is saying that it does not want to relive the days of the Cold War. The post-colonial states have come of age, shed their diffidence, and become more confident and assertive. The other factors that give rise to resentment include the absence of, let us say, climate finance, climate justice, and technology transfer, which have largely become a subject of tokenism by the rich and powerful, despite the urgency and scale of need. What the Global South is seeing is the spending of billions of dollars on fighting wars rather than on poverty alleviation, health, and development. The third and last factor leading to resentment is the problem of indebtedness, adverse terms of trade, and protectionism, which are adding to the sullen mood in the Global South. And in particular, the problem of indebtedness is being swept under the carpet by donors and aid-giving countries. The second sentiment that is coming out from the Global South is frustration, because their troubles and the damage caused to them is being drowned out, and the views are not being heard. They see major powers locked in what could be described as highly obsessive behavior of geostrategic contestation, leaving the vast majority of countries to fend for themselves. I think the most visible problem in this regard was the skewed global response to the COVID pandemic and the fallout of the Ukraine conflict on food, energy, and fertilizer shortages. The last sentiment is that of dispossession. Dispossession because despite decades of efforts, the Global South still remains on the margins of global decision-making bodies, institutions, and processes. In other words, the global governance architecture. And even those that exist, with all their imperfections, are gridlocked and frozen. There are no real avenues for the issues that matter to the Global South to be heard and addressed. And they do not want to fall behind in the next era of technology-led development. So there is an asymmetry between the distribution of global power and decision-making, and the fate of the majority remains in the hands of the few, until as long as their priorities do not match those of the Global South, we may expect the voice of the Global South to reverberate and find expression in different ways and in different forums. We have to therefore be careful, and I would say in this regard, the voting patterns in the United Nations can no longer be taken for granted, and we found this in evidence in the patterns of voting in the United Nations on the Ukraine issue. But we have to be careful that this disposition does not lead to increase in rejectionism, radicalization, isolationism, or even recourse to war and violence to air the grievances of the Global South. I would also like to not leave the impression that the Global South has no positive agenda. The Global South has a positive agenda, and it seeks to bring issues of concern to the vast majority to prominence. India, for example, hosted 2 summits of the Voice of the Global South, in which many new ideas of positive cooperation were discussed. And here I would like to actually emphasize the manner in which India conducted its G20 presidency, which was a remarkable and unparalleled example of consensus building on both the political and economic agenda. The members of the Global South, who were part of the G20, exercised their moral force, played a compelling role in bringing all sides together in adopting a consensus document, most notably on the Ukraine issue. And several other global initiatives were launched and were adopted as part of the G20. Lastly, a few questions. Will the Global South be a pole by itself? I don't think so. Will it have a leader? I don't think so. Will India and China compete for influence in the Global South? I think they will. Will the Global South lead to a multipolar world? Yes, it would. The question before the constituents of the South is whether it is still beneficial to hitch their bandwagon to one or the other major power, or to plow their own furrow and find new ground, independent of existing power structures. But the Global South will throw up new confident powers, including India. It will lead to a more dispersed and fragmented world, but still not one which will be able to challenge the established powers such as the United States. Lastly, I will finish by just talking about the reactions of a few countries and the behavior of a few countries towards the Global South. To begin with, India. India is already the largest country by population. It is expected to be the 3rd largest economy in GDP nominal terms in about seven years, which means, say, by 2030. It will become systemically more significant on the international stage. India will not confront the West, but it will always be a non-Western country, bringing its own civilizational values, which it will hold close to its chest. It will be in Russia's interest to maintain its autonomy and close relations with India without external influence. Russia has an opportunity to take a fresh look at what drives the Global South, how to address its concerns, and how to integrate it into the shaping of a more stable world order without the jaundiced lens of Cold War politics. China, to my mind, is now on the other side of the fence. In the construct that I have tried to present, China is not part of the solution, but increasingly is becoming part of the problem. It is a major power, which it was not 20 years ago, and bears somewhat significant responsibility for the fault lines, tensions, imbalances, and inequalities the world faces today, in much the same way as the other major powers do. It is no longer the other. Lastly, the collective West. Does the West like the Global South? They do not. They still see the Global South through the prism of the Cold War, of us versus them paradigm, and are not able to overcome the ghosts of the non-aligned movement. So, in a nutshell, this is a kind of landscape which I have tried to present to you. Thank you so much.
And it is true that we're talking about the fact that now the global south is fragmented to a great extent. This is true, in spite of the fact that there appear more and more elements of consolidation, signs of consolidation. So there are lots of contradictions within the global south. You mentioned correctly that very soon so then by 2030, so India will become economy number 3 in the world, and when we talk about the global south, we mean that the global south includes India and China as well, and so there are lots of contradictions, and many and there are serious contradictions between China and the United States, because the China will be the second economy in a certain period of time in the world, and this confrontation issues exist, and it's like the international relations, or when we talk about that we're moving towards the new world order, we need to realize that this movement towards the world order will be quite painstaking and contradictory. And now just I'd like to ask our Cuban friend, because I'm very happy we met recently, because he was visiting, Mr. Cabanis was visiting Moscow recently, Cabanis, and Cuba has always taken a special position in global issues, always in international relations, specific position. And this position always was a very high level of sovereignty, independence, but at the same time, so Cuba participated in non-alliance movement within the country's family, always participated actively, and now just the third world per se. So now it's not, so we should not speak about the third world, so that's a bad term now. But still, how from Havana and from Cuba, how do you see the situation concerning the global south? Because the global south will include the South America as well, because there are lots of contradictions there, many problems there. And so then the Argentine elections, for example, only another case in point, right? And so the results of these controversial elections in Argentina.
First of all, let's thank the organizers, particularly Professor Dinkin, Phil, for inviting us. It's the first time in our case to be attending Primakov readings. Also, we pay tribute to the contribution of Yevgeny Primakov to the theory of the international relation and the practice as well. He was one of those guys who had the opportunity to do both, the practice of diplomacy and from the academy as well. May I mark the presence of President Mbeki in the room? And we appreciate the presence of all of you, considering this is the last panel of this exercise. I will not repeat what Ambassador Saran just said on the concept. And we are talking here about the Global South, which is a convention, but not a definitive concept. We would like to say that during the present year, we have witnessed a series of events, and you mentioned, and Ambassador Saran mentioned G77 plus China group. We just hosted a summit in Havana. It's the second South summit that we have hosted, plus 2 non-aligned movement summits. Then Havana and Cuba in general has become a place to debate these subjects for many years. But this year, we have witnessed not only several events that show us the changes taking place in the world, but also the kind of proposals the regional groups, particularly Latin America, is putting forward in order to face the challenge. We do believe that the backdrop of this situation is the growing loss of U.S. hegemony. During the panels, we have been talking mainly about Europe, China, but we are 90 miles away from the big problem for us. And we have witnessed that kind of change in the role of United States and Washington at the planetary scale. This is something that even scholars in the United States, they do recognize. Now we are coming from the neoliberal globalization to decoupling, de-risking, and all those concepts they are using these days. We just had the chance to participate at the celebration in Beijing of the 10th anniversary of the Belt and Road Initiative. We have to say that October the 18th was a very particular day in our lives this year, because we had the coincidence of not only the Chinese authorities, but President Xi Jinping, President Putin was president, and also all leaders from several other countries. And it was a meeting with 150 countries, I mean, representative, official representative, people from NGOs, business people. The very same day, we had the President of the United States supporting ethnic cleansing in Tel Aviv. And that's the kind of event that shows you the two different worlds we are living in. Also, I think it was mentioned before, the continuous non-compliance with the agreements to prevent NATO expansion to the West has created a situation that the United States tried to use on the developed world to create like a turning point in terms of how blocs or different groupings support their policy. And we have to say that they failed. It was mentioned here in a previous panel, the way the international community has voted in that regard, and the same thing happens with what Israel is doing in Palestine these days. The United States tried to rally several countries to receive support, and they didn't. And beyond that, in the case of countries that they got some support, we have to mention, we have to separate the official support from government from what the society in those countries are doing. And we have seen the rallies supporting Palestine. In the summit we just hosted, we have to say that it was approved by consensus political declaration. It was negotiated in New York, but it was finalized in Havana. And for those of you that haven't had the chance to read the document, my suggestion is to you read it, because it's very clear in the objective, at least in this group. And of course, we cannot say that G77 plus China is the global south, but it is the largest group for political concentration in the world. It's 134 countries. And in that document, by the way, the consensus was very easily to reach, but there is like a list of concerns of those countries and suggestions about how to fix those subjects. Many times we have listened here the use of the word multipolar world. Well, I have to say that G77 and non-aligned movement are looking for a multilateralism. It's a relationship between equals, and as many members of the so-called global south are very tiny countries, very dependent countries with very small territories, very small populations, and what they are looking for is a world in which cooperation, which is, by the way, is a word, it's a concept that was mentioned several times on that declaration, prevails. In our view, when you talk about poles, well, it's the possibility of countries or government trying to impose their rules on others. We prefer to use the concept of multilateralism. In our center, before coming to this event, it's a collective effort. We review most of the declaration that has been approved or passed during the G20 meeting this year, G7 meeting this year, European Union Select meeting, G77, and we produce a dossier that we send in advance to the organizers of the event. It is very interesting for two reasons, because in many cases you have countries, first economies, that they show that they don't have the capacity to respond to those needs, to the request of the so-called global south. And at the other end, you have these countries suggesting what to do and how to do it. In one way or the other, we feel that we need new tools also to understand and to analyze what is going on these days. Sometimes we are concern, and many panelists here has been talking about the concern about a potential war. We think that we need to analyze new kind of wars that are taking place that probably are not the conventional ones, and also to analyze if we are living in a peaceful world, if we all enjoy peace in one way or the other. In that regard, we are concerned, and by the way, President Mbeki was the first mentioning here the concern of several countries in the South about the gap that will create the fourth industrial revolution. Every time we have had that kind of advancements, technological advancements, the gap between well-developed countries and underdeveloped countries is larger. Now we are living under the same new situation in artificial intelligence, all the developments that are not benefiting all countries in an equal way. But to finalize our presentation, we are very concerned about what we can call new wars, because those are performed by actors that are national actors. Many times they don't respond to a national policy. They come from private businesses, but they do have a growing influence. They are not regulated by any international document, but they are in the international rule, and they are slowly getting more capacity to influence the status of the world affairs. One of them is probably well known, the so-called digital platforms and the way it influences politics all over the place. Many things has been said on that regard. And the second one, I think a gentleman yesterday raised a question on the subject. I don't think it was fully responded, but it has to do with the potential possibility of having a biological conflict, war, I would say. One of those facts that acted as an earthquake in the global south was the COVID-19 pandemic. Not only because of the victims and the effects, but also the way many countries saw big pharma and some governments taking profit out of the pandemic. That put many governments in a position to think and to negotiate and to have a different view about the regional affairs, and to know that the big powers will not come with a few exceptions, will not come for the solution. In our case, as probably you know, we had to develop by ourselves a solution. Cuba produces 5 vaccines that use not only at the national territory. We sent plus than 50 medical brigades to several countries, in Europe even, to 2 European countries, and we provided service in the Caribbean region, even in those countries that didn't get any support from the colonial powers. I mean, I'm talking about territories that are related to France or to UK, where Cuba provided that service. But as part of the pandemic, we saw many interest of laboratories creating the problem and the potential solution. And we do consider that this kind of practices without a control, without a ruling, could create a new scenario that can be risky for everybody. In terms of G77, we are helping the authorities in Uganda that will host the next meeting, probably one of those larger meetings that will convene most of the so-called global south. And we don't have the solutions for all the problems, of course, but we do believe that it's important that such a large number of countries have the opportunity to convene and to agree on potential solutions. Thank you very much.
Совершенно, мне кажется, справедливо сейчас затронули вопрос.
I guess it is absolutely right. You mentioned the role and possibility at the state level, subnational actors, including those for further promotion of the global south and the ideas and consolidation. It is a large independent factor. I would like to request Mr. Ambassador Varma to comment on this. And I have a question. You know, the present strengthening of the improvement and development of the global south, the trend as the buzzword, as the global south gets more sovereignty, but still remains very fragmented. Do you think the course of events may lead to appearing so-called new empires from the countries of the global south? We know that China openly is accused of imperial ambition. Sometimes there is criticism about India. What's your opinion, Mr. Varma? So is there a trend like that, appearance of so-called new empires? So we primarily mean China and India.
Thank you, Mr. Dinkin, for inviting us. I think the importance of the Primakov readings to place a new session, though it's the last session on a global south, I think is important. Because I think the global south is a loose term. And because it's a loose term, it can be used for different purposes in different contexts. But it does encompass a reality, which has been growing for the last 30 years, but is being noticed now because of the new problems that have arisen. The last 30 years, there's been steady development in different parts of the developing world. The ASEAN is more consolidated, they have steady rates of growth. South Asia, Bangladesh is a good example of how it has grown in our region. Ambassador Saran mentioned India is now on track to be the fastest growing economy among the large economies for the next couple of decades. The Middle East has found its voice. It's no longer just seen as a supplier of oil and the Arab-Israeli conflict. You have to now define the Middle East in much more broader, much more active terms. Africa, after the fall of the apartheid regime in South Africa, a huge change in Africa, in Southern Africa, in the African Union. They're more united. They have views of their own. And Latin America, which has seen a large swathe of democratization, of development. Now, this has happened in the last 30 years, partly also because of the benefits that globalization in its better form provided. Now, why is everybody noticing Global South now? Global South is being noticed because Global South is not a new term. It's an old term. It was always in the cupboard. We are now taking it out to use it in the present context. It is being noticed now because, firstly, on the failure of globalization. Secondly, I think the big power conflict is now more pronounced than in the past. Thirdly, the Global South, constituents of the Global South are now speaking up. The international community cannot no longer ignore the voice of the Global South. Of course, there is not a single voice all the time, but on specific issues, increasingly, the Global South, so so-called developing countries, previously they were called the G77 or through the non-aligned movement or the group in the United Nations, they are, in a sense, voting together. Recently, there was a vote in the UN on the tax debate. 125 countries voted in favor of that thing, of that issue being referred to this, the UN being the main body on the tax debate to be conducted, not in OECD, not elsewhere. Now, on specific issues, I think they do it. Russia-Ukraine war. There were several votes in the General Assembly. I mean, the numbers convey one meaning. But definitely in the developing world, it appeared, it came as a surprise to many, that while the developing world had concerns of its own, they were unwilling to accept the framing of the conflict that emerged from Washington and Brussels. That was not acceptable to the developing world. But they had concerns of their own. the use of force, the larger impact on the international system, the importance of peace returning as quickly as possible. That's a very important shift. The COVID pandemic, of course, laid bare the very ugly side of how big power dominance in particular sectors can play out. Now, I think increasingly the Global South has a view on specific issues. I think let me summarize it in the form of 3 Ds. They are now definitely against various forms of domination. They may not be able to reverse it immediately, but they definitely, in national policies and in collectives that are there regionally, at the UN, in various international bodies, they are working against domination of various forms. Secondly, they also don't want to convert this drive against domination into another form of confrontation and being proxies for the big powers. I think there is many developing countries, not all, are a little reluctant because they also see the experience of what happens to countries that lend themselves to being partners in big power conflict. They don't want to pay that price. Second is, I think the developing world also has a very strong developing agenda. It's at the highest level, it's the SDGs of the UN, but several countries have made progress on this and they do want to take this forward. And you add health security, you add climate change, you add technology transfer, you have developing countries today are better educated, they have more a worldview that is formed of their own. They may not be able to express it in very sharp ways, but this is a big difference that has happened since the end of the Cold War. During the Cold War, of course, we had the non-aligned movement, which expressed as a totality the views of the developing world. So in a sense, the movement itself is weak, but the movement's arguments are in a sense coming back. The third is some common problems which are indicative of the system as a whole, and debt is one such problem. There are 54 countries which have a very critical debt problem, and I'm glad that Russia has given a lot of debt relief to many of the countries that its partners. But the debt problem is largely defined in terms of the IMF and the World Bank. But increasingly, not everywhere, but increasingly in many countries, the debt that they have incurred on part of projects that have cooperated with China is now a more prominent issue. It was not there 30 years ago. So in a sense, China is also an originator of big debt problems now, not uniformly, not as high as the IMF or the World Bank and the Western lending institutions, but it is now part of that group. Last point, I think there is definitely a view in the developing world that the international decision-making bodies and the rule-making bodies completely exclude the developing world in one form or the other. And let me give you some examples. The Security Council permanent membership is an obvious example, but different bodies in the UN is another example. This was particularly a priority for India's G20 presidency. We proposed and we got the G20 to agree to the African Union to be a permanent member of the G20. But this is a work in progress. Rule-making. I mean, we had the old rule-making on nuclear weapons or on trade or on finance in the past. Now we have to make new rules on digital, on cyber, on artificial intelligence, on how to share health risks or climate change risks. Developing countries want to be part of the solution by participating in the decision-making. Let me end by saying something about Russia and India-Russia relations. I don't think India and China can be compared in any manner. China essentially has an self-identity problem, because it is now the second largest economy in the world. Its per capita income is very high, about $12,000, $13,000. But it still wants to be part of the G77. It still wants to be called a developing country. It still wants to be part of the political narrative of the developing world. But its own trade problems, it will never bring to the developing world table. Its own trade problems, it will solve, for instance, in the latest instance, with respect to the summit between President Biden and President Xi in San Francisco. I mean, that's where the real trade problems of China are solved. And they are not solved in the United Nations or the G7. So there is this duality in the Chinese position, but that will get. The ethic of multipolarity is very, very strong. And that can be reflected in the interest that was shown in expansion of BRICS. Though BRICS was expanded only from 5 to 11, but actually there were 25 odd countries that had expressed interest, a wide range of countries. And why is that so? Because the developing world, the representatives, the big noteworthies in the G20, in the global south, do want to come and participate, not just on issues that relate to them and to their local region, but they want to be part of bodies that look at global issues. And they see BRICS as one opening. That is the reason why the popularity of BRICS is so high. The old BRICS was for the old world. We are now entering a new BRICS, which is now the new world, which is a more expanded BRICS. And Russia has the presidency of BRICS coming up next year. A big burden, a responsibility lies on its shoulders. Last point. Russia has a very pronounced pivot to the East policy. It's largely interpreted as Russia having a problem, a conflict with the West, Europe and the United States, and it is moving towards China. I would recommend or suggest that Russia should also have a look south policy, not just East. And don't confuse the two, because East and South are now slowly going to be differential in their content. And that involves Russia has already made a very good beginning. They have a vibrant engagement with Africa. They have the Africa Summit. You have a vibrant engagement with Central Asia. But I think Russia, and that applies to India as well, we should not see the global south through the prism of our conflict with the other big powers. I think the global south will resent it. There will be obstacles to expansion of cooperation. I think we should see global south cooperation for the value it creates for international peace and prosperity. I mean, they have something to contribute. Lastly, I think the greatness of Mr. Primakov was that he combined for Russia both its look east and the look south policy when he suggested the Russia, India, China combine, which is now taken over by BRICS. But I think BRICS needs also to be taken forward. Again, I would say there's a point that has already been mentioned on this panel, not in terms of confrontation and not of splitting of the world into various blocks, because the global south has been through that and we don't want to revisit that. But I think we should continue to be a voice, and the BRICS should continue to be a voice of dialogue, of breaking down barriers, of bringing about peace, and changing the global narrative, which is definitely moving out of the shadow of the West. But in place of the shadow of the West, it is our responsibility and our opportunity to construct a new global ethic, a new global discourse, which is positive, constructive, which brings universalism together and the respect for everyone. And I think with that, India and Russia are natural partners. Our bilateral relationship gives us the space, the depth, to engage not just bilaterally, but globally. And I think the global South should become, engaging with the global South should become a new agenda item on relations between India and Russia.
Очень важные ваши замечания.
Oh, very important comments. Thank you.
На Восток, естественно, мы
So when we talk about the East, so I mean not only the East, but we mean other countries that would like to do business and cooperation. The summit of Russia-Africa that you mentioned, and so that I was lucky to participate, and extremely successful event from the viewpoint of learning each other, so knowing each other, and specific cooperation points. But I would like to stress that the cooperation with the South Asia and India, first and foremost, Russia, it's extremely important relations for Russia with India. And for us, India has historically been a country that has always been friendly, close, and fantastically interesting culture, deep culture, and very popular Indian culture in the Russian society. And so now just we are learning Hindi. New schools open up where Hindi is being taught. And I'd like to tell you that at our university, students have to learn 2 languages, and the third is the language of choice, and so because you have to pay even for the third language, because 2 languages are part of the curriculum, and the third language you have to pay. And so the number of students who want to learn Hindi as a third language is growing every year, and now we have hundreds of students who want to learn Hindi. That bespeaks the importance of South Asia and India first and foremost. Now, I would like just to Bangladesh. I would like to turn to him. Because Bangladesh has been developing very dynamically in recent years, and as we know that this development is extremely important for some industries of the global economy. So I guess you may have paid attention to the fact that there's been a lot of publications recently related to the difficulties that arose because of the strikes at the sewing factories in Bangladesh. Because I never knew that before, that lots of products and goods at the international market and brand products, brand goods are made in Bangladesh. And now just the customers they're apprehensive that at the beginning of 2024 they will face difficult just about supplies of jeans and jerseys and other products that are produced in Bangladesh and their delivery to retail chains. I'd like to ask you, Mr. Hook, so how do you see how can we overcome the implications and the consequences of neo-colonialism from the viewpoint of strengthening the global South? So what would be the role of Bangladesh? Not only Bangladesh, but generally the countries around you, what would be their role? Thank you.
Спасибо. Я последний.
I am the last speaker, so may I speak in Russian? I wanted to say that for me, so to be present at this event is a great honor. And I knew Evgeny Maximovich since 1979. So when I got to the postgraduate at the Institute of Eastern Studies, I was there and I did my postgraduate degree. And I practically grew in this institute, and I earned my dissertation there, my PhD there. I earned, and this is my very close place. And then in capacity of an ambassador, I worked for more than 10 years in Moscow, representing Bangladesh, and our relations between Russia and Bangladesh, so for more than 10 years, has been developing extremely fast, especially in the era of energy power. And what is important, that it is owing to the Russian technical and financial support. So Bangladesh now is building the first nuclear power station, Rupur, which will about face our place, our location, our importance in the global south. And then it will certainly, the attention and the importance of Bangladesh will definitely grow, not only in this region, but in the international arena, because we'll become a member of the nuclear club. And so they have already brought in the nuclear fuel, and Mr. Likhachev spoke about that. So he visited the place, we brought in the nuclear fuel, and now just when he was talking, making his presentation this morning, so I told him that we need to follow up on this program. And the most interesting thing is that I would specifically point out for the audience that in this during this construction, India has a great deal of influence, because we have a trilateral agreement between India, Bangladesh, and Russia. So we have this. This was the idea. It was quite difficult. Why India was one of the parties? Because in 1971, if we go back to the initial stages of our independence, so there was the Soviet Union there, and India played an extremely important role. It is because of the India's role I am here together with you, sitting in front of this wonderful audience, and can express my opinion as a member of an independent state. And so when we certainly have prepared this presentation, but I will extemporize. I'll speak off the cuff. It is true that in recent times, recent years, the development of Bangladesh's economy, so we are developing very rapidly now, especially in the area of finished clothing. Because Bangladesh takes the second place in the world in the area of production of brand clothes. So why it's happening? So what's happening in Bangladesh? So why? Because the salaries of the workers are just infinitesimally small. It's very difficult to survive on this salary. The wages are very low, and they were in long, extensive talks with Western companies such as Maxim & Spencer, H&M brands. We talked to them, Levi's. We were in negotiations and talks with them, so that we produce 70% of the production of jeans in the world. That's why. So very soon. So it will be short supply very soon, and it will cost much more in next year. But we are in talks with the trade unions and the government, but no result, appreciable result. So they cannot stop this strike. So they can't stop because they raised the salary, but the dollar exchange rate does not match. So it turned out to be even less than they used to get because of the change of the dollar rate. It's very difficult. And then the upcoming elections, you probably know that in the Americans, so there's a new line of their activities. So that they used it in many countries. They want to change the regime change. So that they've been pursuing this policy in many countries. And there's some then esteemed colleagues who worked as an ambassador in Bangladesh. So he knows exactly what's happening there. And so then, in case of this regime change, so we'll find ourselves in a very difficult position because Islamic fundamentalism that we have. So they may raise their heads, and that will destabilize, unbalance not only Bangladesh but all neighboring countries, all this India and etc. They may be involved. And that's what concerns Russia, that's what concerns China, that's what concerns India, because there are lots of the Chinese investments in Bangladesh, especially in the area and infrastructure, so Chinese invested a lot. And Russian investments, that's almost $12 billion of investments, because that's my baby. I started it out, this nuclear unit, and I value it very much, and I'm very much worried. So we need just to finish it on time, and we need to start making money on it. because we really need electricity. We really need energy. Concerning Bangladesh, Bangladesh is closely connected to Gazprom. Gazprom helps us a lot for drilling natural gas wells. And so for American companies like Chevron, Total, French companies, so they were monopolists and 10 years ago, and so suddenly they lost the market, and they are unhappy about that. And then geopolitically, Bangladesh is located in the Bengal Bay, which is extremely strategic and important, valuable location. In order to get different services around our country, to get services, the Chinese and the Americans, let's put it this way, so then gassing up their vessels, so when they go through this region and this transit, and our Prime Minister, Sheikh Hasina, our acting minister, refused this suggestion, this proposal. So that generally Bangladesh is facing a choice. We're in a difficult situation, so the Americans are interfering in our internal affairs. So they're telling us how to organize elections, and Al-Sheikh Hasina so refused to subjugate, to go after that. So and they start applying sanctions already. So they're designing sanctions for against Bangladesh by the Americans. And so we're waiting for more sanctions from America, from the United States, because they will never let us be. They will never leave a chance to apply more sanctions on us, because sanctions is a common thing just for the global policy. That's the main instrument of the global policy. If the U.S. doesn't like something, so they immediately slap us with sanctions. That's why we need just to together fight against those sanctions. And we know that they won't leave us alone. They will continue to apply. And so, like at the end of World War II, after World War II, there is going the redistribution in the world, the reshufflement of the world, and suddenly the EU and America don't like it. They don't like it, and I think that Russia now is acquiring more and more strength, more weight in international politics. And so before the collapse of the Soviet Union, all developing countries, or the global South, so they always looked up at the Soviet Union. Always always expected help and support to provide us protection, defense. And that's what we need from Russia right now. And that's because Russia, not only Russia, but India is developing very rapidly. It's a huge country as well, because India is our closest neighbor. We have great trade relations, first place in trade. And so then a lot of development success in Bangladesh depend on our relations with India. And I think that I can talk much longer about that. If there are any questions, I will answer. Thank you. So the question that had to do with the response to the trends of strengthening of the positions of the Global South, in spite of all the issues that you have identified. So how can we evaluate the position of the West vis-a-vis this mega trend? How the West responds to that, and what can we expect in future? Will it be a policy of looking for compromises, adaptation, adjustment of the Western countries' policy vis-a-vis the mega trends of the Global South, or as Mr. Ambassador was talking, or it will be kind of opposition, confrontation, and sanctions. What do you think? Which way the West, the Global West, will choose in future? And so I don't want just to hog both sessions. It turns out that my colleague, Mr. Kupriyanov, got sick, and so I fill in for him. First, when we talk about the dynamics of the system of international relations, so where the global south acquires more and more weight. So then it's obvious that there are two trends that we can observe. One of the trends is a polycentric system forming that we spoke at length. So global, we can see it in the global economy, international relations. On the other hand, so there's a trend to the formation of inside this new entity, this new world order, new bipolarity between China and the United States, and it's appearing as well. So if you look at the previous world order, so this confrontation between the Soviet Union and the United States, when it stabilized and became obvious that there are the two great powers and there are many countries that actually got out of the colonial dependence and then acquired new power and political weight. It became obvious that not all of them want to inscribe themselves into this bipolar system, but want become voice number three. The Baidu conference, the non-aligned movement started, G77 movement started. And so there were projects that should have taken into consideration their portion, the voice of developing countries in the global development, economic development. So then the global economic order discussions concerning support of the development. So now we're in a different situation because on the one hand, it is true that the economic giants, the U.S. and China, so there are two confronting economic and political aspects, two powers, and at the same time, so there is confrontation between Russia and the West. But if we look at the objective trends, at the global economy, world economy, we'll see that according to the assessment of MMO, India by 2030 will become economy number 4, and by 2024 India will become economy number 3. Brazil by 2030 will become economy number 8. By 2040 may become economy number 7 in the world. Indonesia from the 15th place in 2014, by 2030 the Indonesian economy will get to the 10th place. And this is completely different reshufflement. It's a different global economy, and it's completely different global order. So the most important factor that would influence the relation between the Western countries and the possibility of development of the global South countries, it depends on how the global value chains will be forming, how they will be distributing, and how the system of international division of labor will be developing. And so, because if we look at the 70s and the 80s, 90s, and even the 2000s, so then we'll see that the majority of the global value chains were formed by the Western capital. So first transnational capital inside the West, then globally, and the global South countries were ready to be involved in any way, in any fashion, in any shape. Getting access to like suppliers, to getting access to this value chains, and what happened in front of our eyes just in the last 15 years? New transnational companies from the leading countries, from India, from Brazil, Chinese capital plays in order. The new corporations appear from Russia, and these transnational companies, new ones that are not represent. They do not represent the West. They create different system of benchmarks in the global, and they transform the system of division of labor completely differently. And so we spoke to Saiful Haq. We talked to what's happening in Bangladesh with investments, the direct investments of large American and very telling and European companies. So now, the workers will go on strike. Tomorrow they will try to get better conditions, and the day after tomorrow, so the company from Bangladesh will become a big actor first at the Indian market, then at the Russian market, then at the Chinese market, and will become a global player, and I know that's exactly what's happening now with Indian companies that go international, like Brazilian companies that go international too. much will depend on these processes. And Western countries and the United States and their allies, they will have to either comply, shape in, or ship out. But not only fighting, not only against Russia and fight against China, but from the global south too. They will have to oppose the global south, which is practically impossible. So because the global economy will change in the near 20 years. And so that's a wonderful conclusion. So when you were talking about the EU, that 1/3, according to the forecasts, I think that India will be number 3. I think that India will be, by 2030, India will be number 3 economy. Yes, by 2023 it will be number 3. Because according to Japan, by 2030, in our assessment, by 2030 Japan will keep its position of the 3rd economy of the world. And I'm not talking the EU as a composite entity, because we're taking separate. Okay, there's different assessments. Yeah, but our model forecasts that. But by 2040, India will definitely pass Japan and will become economy number 3. They will pass Germany, many other countries, and Japan. So we have a chance. How much time we have? So 5 minutes. So please introduce yourself and then please introduce yourself and ask your question. Good evening. I have a question to Mr. Varma. Director of the Center of Research Initiatives in Tashkent. Just November 2nd and 3rd in Xiamen in China, so there was held the first dialogue, November 2nd, 3rd, of think tanks, of Global South think tanks. 53 countries were represented, and more than 100 different research centers were represented. And for 2 days, so November 2nd, November 3rd, so they were brainstorming main issues, starting from prospects for BRICS and etc., and all the way down to the formation of the system of health in the global south, remembering the positive experience of the developing countries. And then there's something very interesting. There's a metaphor proposed by the head of one of the analytic centers from Namibia. He said that the main problem it's a shortage of money. It's not shortage of money. It's not shortage of technologies. The main problem of the global south, it's a metaphor. So nice, beautiful metaphor. Main problem is not that the history of zebras are written by lions. That's the main problem. So the history of zebras, and the relationship between the zebras and the lions are written by the lions, and we're still living in this paradigm. So, Mr. Varma, in your, do you think that? So what's happening right now? What we see, this process is of deglobalization. Do you think this will bring about new world order, multipolar world order with big macro regions? Will it lead to it with big zones? Will it bring the world to the moment when the global south will learn to speak about itself so with the language of the zebras and not use the language of the lions? So to what extent this de-westernization will occur when lions will stop describing zebras, you as countries and you as nations?
Well, thank you. You see, the point I was trying to make is that the developing countries' situation today is better than it was 30 years ago. It is definitely better than it was 60 years ago. We had almost no role in drafting the UN Charter. We didn't design globalization. We were inducted into it and sucked into it. Now, if the old globalization is having difficulties and it needs to be reformed, It, of course, creates some amount of instability, but it also gives us an opportunity to reconstruct globalization in a more positive, in a more humane manner. If we are united, if we are clear about our objectives, we can contribute to that global debate. Multipolarity can take place in two ways. It can be a contested multipolarity where power is shifted only by the use of force, which is not a good way to go about it. It has huge negative consequences. Or it can be negotiated and taken forward in a structured manner. For us in the developing world, we would like a negotiated, structured transition to a multipolar world. Now, about the lions and the zebras. We know who the old lions are. We know them. They need not have any description. But the question that the very wise rector asked, and which I didn't answer, is there a lion sitting amongst us who will then become a lion like the old lions? Well, if we are not clear in our mind, it will happen. If we are clear in our mind, if we are vigilant, and we are vocal in our protecting our interests, the chances of this will not happen. Let me answer the question now of what the rector asked, the honorable rector asked. Is India and China the same? We had a maritime dispute with Bangladesh on where the maritime line outside our shores would touch. We asked something, Bangladesh said no. We went to the International Tribunal under UNCLOS. The UNCLOS Tribunal gave a verdict in favor of Bangladesh. They said Bangladesh has a case and that line will shift in favor of Bangladesh. India accepted the tribunal order. Look at the Chinese example on what is happening in the South China Sea. You think the countries of ASEAN don't know who the new lion will be amongst their neighborhood? They do. They are negotiating for the last 20 years a code of conduct on the South China Sea. 20 years, you don't take 20 years to. So, you know, we would like to wish for that amongst the Asian countries, they don't come up and become one of and act like the old Western countries. We hope that we move to a new world where everybody is changed and it's more constructive and more peaceful and more prosperous for all.
О, хорошо. Не видел.
Thank you. I'm Daniel Khatai from Iran, Higher School of Economics. As you all know, thanks to the United States, Iran never managed to finish the process of ascension to the WTO. And this is a major problem for us in terms of our international trade. I would like to hear from the panel members if in their opinion, we will witness the rise of a new WTO-like framework for the Global South, or in the near future, the future megatrend going to be regional economic blocs like ASEAN and the GCC reaching agreements with one another bilaterally, therefore setting a trade agenda for their member countries. Thank you.
Who is ready to answer this question? Dear friends, Ambassador.
Well, thank you. I don't think you will have another WTO. I think the current WTO is virtually dysfunctional, and most of the trade disputes are being settled outside the WTO. So the Uruguay round and everything else that we saw a few decades ago, that was the pinnacle of establishing an international trading system which was intended to balance trade interests with development interests. So in the last few years, the WTO has literally become quite ineffective. Whether we can go to a fresh WTO, I don't think so, because I don't think the mood in the international community is conducive. In fact, we have to preserve whatever little international trading architecture that we have today. Events of the last 2-3 years have shown that international trading arrangements have fractured. The weaponization of trade, finance, investment is contributing hugely to the collapse of an integrated global trading system that we had got used to. So you are right that what is the alternative? And countries will increasingly take recourse, as you are saying, to sub-regional and regional arrangements. I think that trend will continue, but you will see the fracturing of supply chains, you will see securitization of trade, you will see politicization of investment decisions. So I think we are entering into a difficult period, and all of this is going to adversely affect the interests of the developing world. Although already, because of the Ukraine conflict, we are seeing the serious negative impact of the Ukraine conflict on the entire European economy. Energy inflation, almost negligible growth rates, almost some of them are facing deindustrialization. So I would say yes, we are going to face new situations, but I don't think the mood on the global landscape is to create another supranational mega body. And I think here, countries like Iran or India or anyone else, we will have to look at each other much more than we did in the past.
Ahmed Salim from Yemen. I think our friend from Cuba, Rodriguez, has referred to a very important issue when he mentioned the meeting in Havana and then taking the aspect of new order to the UN through the G77 plus China. Maybe in continuation of Mr. Saran has mentioned that now WTO is not doing well on the trade level, but it is now 50 years in the United Nations since the UN adopted the new International Economic Order resolution and the plan of action. And since then, there are a lot of aspects of new phenomena, as the speakers has mentioned, the pandemic, the climate change, and all these things. So still the UN is a framework where people can find some consensus on development questions, like now what G77 plus China, which is a sort of representative of Global South, can elaborate some better positions how to do related to the international situation. My question to Mr. Saran, do you think with this now people are speaking new order, new world order, if it is multilateral or multipolar or whatever, NAM is still a framework possible for Global South, or you think there will be another framework? Thank you very much.
Well, thank you for your questions. You give me opportunity to relate your question to other subjects that has been mentioned here. Still, United Nations plays the role to, it's a house for consensus on several topics. The problem is, after we reach the consensus, what do we do? You mentioned the previous summit on other issues, but United Nations for 30 years has been passing a resolution with the only opposition from the United States and Israel most of the time against the blockade on Cuba. Of course, we do receive the support from many countries in that regard. But in terms of United States actions against Cuba, it has meant no limit. I mean, as we know, in the last years, they have reinforced the blockade on Cuba. And answering to your question, I can relate to what Professor Dinkin mentioned yesterday, which is we can agree on general ideas, we can agree on projections, but unless we create new mechanisms, we create new rules to move forward, we create new institutions, we will be talking probably for many years about a transition period, which is the kind of new world we would like to have, but nothing will happen, actually. And probably this kind of dialogue can take us to a specific project in which our countries, of course, none of us are represented officially, our governments here, but we can suggest about potential projects for integration. I'm thinking about, again, for instance, CARICOM integration purposes. CARICOM, I mean Caribbean States Integration Organization, it meets regularly, and we do have a mechanism which is CARICOM Cuba. As long as we can support them in many subjects, basically related to health, education, agriculture, we do. But in many cases, those projects need financing, funds that cannot come from Cuba. Then I'm talking about people outside Caribbean states with the resources to do that. We have previously a panel on Africa, and they were asked how Russia can contribute to Africa, other countries that have the resources. We do have the capacity. I mean, countries has been expressing, or representative from several countries represented the review here, to locate where the problems are and to act in a collective way, as was said before, without that concept of, from anyone among us, to be a pole of power. And probably among ourselves we will be able to fix many situations that the world is living through now, reaching a consensus. Thank you.
So 2 points. Firstly, I think the non-aligned movement had a negative connotation about it, that it was a consequence of the world situation of that time, where the newly independent countries were forced or expected to choose between two opposing camps. And the leaders of that time took the view that we do not want to be a part of either. And so non-alignment became somewhat of a negative concept. The Global South, in my opinion, is a much more positive approach to the global situation and the international order. So that's the first point, and I think it's a fundamental point. But secondly, I would see both going in parallel. Cuba hosted the non-aligned summit. You will continue to have that. It's not going to stop. But you will also have the Global South. The thing about the Global South, the way it is evolving, is that it is, number one, open. It is open-ended, rather. It is inclusive. And no one is trying to define it. No one is trying to codify it. We are not likely to see long communiques coming out of the Global South. It's a self-selection group. And that will, I think, be, so this strategic, if one can call it, ambiguity about the Global South might perhaps be today its biggest strength.
Профессор Денкин, коллеги, наше время истекло, как говорил герой какого-то фильма, поэтому я хочу сердечно поблагодарить панелистов. Мне кажется, что очень интересная получилась сессия. Вопросов больше, чем ответов. Вопросов, и вот вы совершенно справедливо сказали, что, во-первых, еще никто не кодифицировал глобальный юг. Вместе с тем мы понимаем, что сегодня многие процессы глобализации пошли под откос. в том, что о ВТО говорили, я понимаю, что вырабатываются взамен правил ВТО многие регламенты региональные, в части касающейся торговли, и не только торговля, а регулирование инвестиций, да и многих других вопросов. И, конечно, это несет в себе известные опасности, я с вами согласен, и озабоченности. Но вместе с тем ясно, что это объективный процесс, и мы должны его принимать как данность. Но я вот совершенно согласен с нашим коллегой-послом, что к этому надо относиться очень осторожно, очень внимательно, неторопливо, не радикально, потому что созданные механизмы разрушить, конечно, можно. Знаете, сколько негатива звучит и в адрес Организации Объединенных Наций. Но никто лучше пока не придумал ничего. Другое дело, что те механизмы, которые плохо работают или не работают, ну, от каких-то, может быть, стоит отказаться, а от какими-то поработать, улучшить их, настроить на новую реальность. Короче говоря, предмет для дискуссии еще очень много.
So we still have many subjects and topics for discussion. I hope at the next Primakov's reading and other meetings as well, and numerous meetings everywhere that we shall have in India, in Bangladesh, in Cuba, and in other countries whose representatives we have here in Primakov reading. We shall discuss those problems and contribute in search for answers to solve those problems. We thank you so much. We thank the participants.